Jerusalem of Palestinians. Even the local representative of the so-called Palestinian Authority claimed to support the Hanun family. But now we know from the Palestine papers that they had already offered that entire neighborhood to the Israeli government almost 2 years before this happened. What this shows is that this is not about diplomatic rhetoric. This is about people in power imposing their will on those who do not have power. And we must stand in solidarity with those people suffering at the hands of those in power. The day after the Hanun family were evicted, I got a phone call from a friend of mine in Belaim, a small Palestinian village in the West Bank, to tell me that at the same time as we were being evicted, 200 Israeli soldiers had invaded the village and arrested 7 residents. So I went back to Belaim, but little did I know that this village would become my home for the next 6 months. So I want to tell you about, first of all, it's important to recognize that this village is situated right on the apartheid wall that Israel has built, which has stolen over half of the land of the village. Now, many people here are farmers, so many of them lost everything they had when the wall was built. Now, every Friday for the last 6 years, and that's going back to when construction on the wall began, the people of the village marched non-violently to protest against the theft of their land and to demonstrate their disgust at Israel's policies in a peaceful manner. So for 6 months, I marched with them, and every week, without fail, we were met with clouds of tear gas, sound grenades, rubber-coated steel bullets, and even live ammunition from the Israeli army. Also, in response to the demonstrations, the Israeli army launched a campaign of intimidation and harassment against the people of Belaim. For 4 months straight, the Israeli army would raid the village at night, dragging young teenage boys from their beds as they slept, some as young as 13 or 14 years old, and putting them in jail for months on end, purely for the fact they dared to participate in the demonstration. Now, when I first arrived in the village, I didn't know the people being arrested, but as 1-2 months passed, it became my close friends and people I was hanging out with and talking to in the day being taken away from us at night. And the invasions were not only limited to the night. Sometimes the army would even come into the village in the middle of the day just to harass the people living there. During one of these day invasions, the head of the army went to the mother of the family I was living with, and they lived in one of the closest houses to the wall. And he said to her, if these demonstrations every Friday don't stop, then we're going to come back and blow your house up. So it's a surprise we got any sleep there. but also I want to tell you about the people I met and got to know in Belayim. The first person I met there was a guy called Haitham. He was working as a filmmaker and came out every night to document the raids, and of course every Friday to film the demonstration. Now, since the non-violent resistance there began, Haitham had lost his usual job as an electrician and therefore his only form of income. And so I asked him once why he had sacrificed so much time and energy to come out every night. And he told me that he had been arrested in a similar raid when he was 15 years old and imprisoned for 2 years, and that he didn't want the children now to feel as terrified as he felt when he was arrested. Now, Haitham's youngest child, a 2-year-old boy called Kami, was diagnosed with leukemia at just a few months of age. Now, before the resistance began, Haitham would take his son to the hospital in Jerusalem every day to get treatment. But since he started filming the night raids and the demonstrations, the Israeli army refused to renew his permit to travel into Jerusalem, which of course is occupied Palestinian land in the first place. So for daring to play a role in this resistance movement, he is not allowed to take his young child into Jerusalem to get treatment he needs to live. For most of my time in Belayim, I was living with a guy called Hamdi. He's 22 years old, working as a photographer, and has all the same ambitions and aspirations as me or you. But the only difference for Hamdi is that he is faced with the reality of being trapped under a military occupation. Every night we would sit up in his room together, waiting for news of another invasion and wondering who would be arrested next. Hamdi's oldest brother is a guy called Khamiz. During one of the Friday demonstrations, he was standing with his hands in the air when an Israeli soldier shot him in the head from around 20 meters away with a high-velocity tear gas canister. He was in a coma for 2 weeks, stayed in hospital for several months after that, and still suffers from his injuries today. And you could tell because all his brothers were very humorous people, whereas Khamiz was much more serious and would get angry over small things. But nevertheless, we became very close, and I remember once we were talking about a week before I was due to leave, and he said, "Jody, I don't want you to leave because it will be like Bassem." And he was talking about Bassem Abu Rahma, his cousin, who was killed during a demonstration in April 2009. And at the time he was killed, he was standing at the front of the demonstration with his arms stretched in the air, shouting at the soldiers, "Stop shooting, because I think you've injured an Israeli activist."